we're really hoping you'll enjoy this. So this is our third in our Fitness Roadshow webinar series, and obviously, like you signed up to, this is looking at speed and agility development in youth athletes. So my name's Ian Quinn. My background in this would be I'd have a sports science degree from UL, and I'd have a bit of experience on the strength and conditioning side with Munster Rugby and Oxford United in the UK. Teresa, do you want to give yourself a quick little introduction there so I don't butcher it?
Thanks, Ian. So yeah, my background would be in strength and conditioning. I tutor a little bit with Setanta College, and I would be involved with the Dublin ladies football squads as well, doing that. So
super. Yeah, and we've got James helping us here today as well. So James is just going to be monitoring the chat and making sure any of your questions we don't miss you, anything like that. And James will probably chip in with a bit of discussion then around a few of the questions. So without any further ado, we'll crack on. We'll get going. We're going to try and keep this as interactive as we can, guys. There's going to be plenty of stops for questions. So we really do want to hear your input when we can. Like just to quickly reiterate from the start as well, so the webinar is being recorded. The recording will go up on YouTube. So up to yourselves if you want to leave your video on or off. But we'll just like to ask if you keep your mic muted for throughout. If you have a question, either raise your hand or throw it in the chat. So moving on then. So our learning outcomes for today. So we're looking to firstly learn the correct techniques for speed and agility and the key coaching points. So that's for you as coaches when you're coaching either speed or agility drills or technique, that you know what you're looking for, you know how to correct errors, so on. And then also understand how to train speed and agility with drills and games. So take that knowledge of the correct technique and be able to apply that to drills and games to actually develop your athletes or your young players and improve their speed and agility. So firstly, this is where we're going to start trying to make it as interactive as possible. So why do you think speed and agility are important? So we'll try to keep this specific to Gaelic games. So any of the 4 codes, why are speed and agility important? Very simple. Let's see what you think on this one. So just 1 minute, fire into the chat box there.
Yeah, they're flying in now, Ian.
Flying in. Okay, what have we got?
We have to get to the ball first. GA is a skill game played at speed for competitiveness, to avoid a tackle, to get from A to B as fast as possible, move into space and avoid tackles, to break lines and create overlaps. So hard to defend against. Yeah, they're really flying in now.
Flying in, yeah. Well, that first one, even that, get to the ball first, winning primary possessions, obviously a huge one for speed. Then, the way we're going to work it today, guys, I'm going to go through a lot of this straight line speed part, and then all that in terms of evading defenders and break and tackle stuff is probably more to do with agility, and Teresa will hit on that. But that's absolutely spot on, guys. I've got a couple of I got the text box open here, and there's some great answers. But yeah, super. So we've kind of got the idea of it. Teresa, do you want to set the scene a little bit?
Yeah, so I suppose, thanks Ian. So I suppose what we're going to talk about tonight is speed and agility in the context of effective movement on the pitch and the role that effective movement has on sports performance. So we're not talking about developing speed and agility just to get faster from A to B. How does that affect our sports performance? Does it help us to perform better at Gaelic football or at hurling? So when we look at Gaelic games, often what distinguishes the really good players, it's not just their skill levels, but the standard of movement that accompanies these skills. So any type of movement training that we do in a GA context, it should be related to the sport. And that's our aim really in any movement training program, is the enhancement of sports performance. So we have to think about, when we're evaluating the standard of movement used by players, we have to think about it not just in terms of speed, but also in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. So the ultimate test is the ability of players to perform the skills of the game. So although our speed and agility are crucial elements in a movement training program, they just can't be considered successful unless they directly help us to become better hurlers and footballers. So we need to be able to express that speed and agility in a sports context. So like what a load of those responses were in the chat box there, spot on, like we need to do it in the terms of our sport. So I suppose when we look at effective movement, what does it look like? And I suppose it has 5 main characteristics. So the first thing is that it's task orientated. We need to get to a particular place on the pitch in order to do something. So that's usually to execute a skill at the end of it. So there's a skill to be performed at the end of the movement. So that could be a kick, it could be a strike, it could be a solo, a block, whatever it is. Effective movement, it's also precise, it's controlled, it's efficient, and there's frequent adjustment. And that will all depend on what the player sees and hears on the pitch. So if we look at the picture there of the player performing the near hand tackle, well, what did he have to do to get into a position such that he could carry out that tackle effectively? So he might have had to track the player, he might have had to adjust his body position to a more favourable one, he might have had to accelerate just so he could get his hip beside the player so that he was in a good position to execute the near hand tackle without fouling. So basically his movement will allow for effective execution of the whatever sports skill it is. So in this case, it's the near hand tackle. So just getting to the player and quickly, that'll never be enough unless he's in a position to carry out the skill. So ultimately, our movement drills need to be related to the exact requirements of the sport. And again, like we said, success is measured not by necessarily by improved times and speed and agility, but by improved performance on the field. And oftentimes then when our skills break down, it can be traced back to poor movement, in so much that like whatever the player's movement and the whatever body position he found himself or herself in, it just didn't allow for the skill to be completed successfully. So a poor shot, poor tackle, or maybe even something like a defender losing his or her opponent. It could be just because he did it actually too fast and he wasn't able to stop in time, and then he got easily sidestepped. So it's just a breakdown in the movement pattern there. So in the case of the near hand tackle above, if the defender wasn't able to accelerate to get level with the hip of the attacking player, well, then he might start making that tackle from behind and he'd end up just pulling his arm and then causing a foul. So if you could have that little extra bit of gas and accelerate those extra couple of meters to get level with him, then he's in a good position to execute the skill. Okay. When we look at the movements then that are in Gaelic games, they're divided basically into three main categories. So the first one there is initiation movement, or how's a movement started. So we can, if we're starting to the front, we'll accelerate. If we're starting to the side, we'll do our hip turn. If we need to change direction to the rear, we'll use our drop step. If we need to change direction laterally, we could use our cut step. And to the front and back, we have our plant step. So that's a lot just in terms of various ways in how we start off a movement. And then the second category, we have our transition movements. So these are movements that basically we use to prepare for what's coming next. So here we're looking to maintain a really good position, and then whatever our subsequent action is, that can be successfully and efficiently used. So you'd have stuff here like jockey and side shuffling, backpedaling, and the list down there. So there's a good few of them. And then our last category then are our actualization movements, so where we're covering the ground. So these are the key movements that will ultimately decide the success of our actions. So these are normally involve a games-related skill or get into a given position as quickly as possible. So when we relate it then back to our games, anytime we play a game, there's basically we're doing one of 4 things. So we're either attacking, we're defending, or we're moving from attack to defense, or vice versa, moving from defense to attack. So if we take attacking first, right, what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to create space or to find space on the pitch. So what do we have to do? We have to attract the defenders out. And how do we do that? We either move the ball or we move the players. How do we move the players? We can use our acceleration, curved running, deceleration, etc. So in order to create space. If we're defending then, what are we trying to do there? Well, we want to get our defensive organization pretty spot on. So we want to be able to close down our space rapidly. And depending on read what's happening in front of us, again, our movement skills here, basically acceleration, deceleration, we'll be doing our jockey and side shuffling, backtracking, all that kind of stuff. If we transition from attack to defense, so we're attacking and then we lose the ball and we have a turnover, well, what are we trying to do there? Well, we have to really press rapidly to recover the ball, or else to organize our our defense again. So we have to close down that space really quickly. And again, here we could be looking at acceleration, max speed, curve running, deceleration, jockey, and all that kind of stuff to get ourselves back into a good defensive position. And then let's pretend then we have, we're transitioning from defense to attack. So we turn over the ball in defense, and now we're looking at a counter-attacking movement. So what are we trying to do here? Well, we're hoping our opposition, their defense will be a little bit disorganized, and we'll be hoping to exploit that. So this is a rapid change of direction here. So we're looking at accelerating, max speed running, curved running, directional change. So it's in the context of all that's happening within, whether it's hurling or football, that we're trying to use these movement skills to improve our performance and to affect our performance. So I think, Ian, we're going to go back to you, and you're going to take the straight line running. So you're going to have a quick look, or not a quick look, a look at acceleration and max velocity. So I'll hand it back to you.
Super. Okay. So yeah, basically what I'm looking at for the next few, I'm going to look at acceleration, max velocity, and deceleration. So basically this is just everything in a straight line. Teresa will look at our agility and our change direction, and she'll probably link into what actually I'm just seeing David Gagan said in the chat about reaction time and all that as well. So purely on the straight line stuff, we're going to start with acceleration, because that's the place to start. So we actually picked this child as a demonstration here, and it's actually for a child or a young player. It's a remarkably good technique. So we're looking for a forward lean. So when we're accelerating, we want to go forward. So we don't want our power going up. We want to go push back to go forward. So he's pushing back into the ground and going that direction. So he's leaning forward, and you look at his shin. So his shin and the leading foot is nearly running parallel to his body. On the next slide now in a second, you'll see that parallel line in action in an actual sprinter. So his head's facing down, so he's not looking up out ahead of him, using his arms. So he's big arms to generate all that power, and he's so longer ground contact time. So because you're using more force in your acceleration, you need more power and more strength to get out of the blocks. You actually have to spend a little bit longer on the ground. So each step takes a little bit longer, but you just need putting more generating more force and putting it into the floor. So you can use a good cue when you're talking to youth athletes is you're rising slowly like a plane. So when a plane takes off, it doesn't go straight from flat to straight up. It comes up very, very slowly. And that's the easy cue to say to a player. So when he's starting off in his sprint, he's starting off low, 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 and slowly rises up until he comes upright in his max velocity. Teresa, you cue that on to me for me, please. So this is what I'm saying a second ago, okay? So if you look at the sprinter on the left, we've got from his heel to his head is a straight line. So he's got his ankle, knee, and hip all fully extended, all fully locked out, trying to get every bit of power out he can. So straight line from ankle up to head. And you see that leg at the front, so like what I was saying about the young kid a second ago, that his shin in front and the front leg is actually running parallel to the line of his body. He's also got the big arms running across, helping to generate that power. And then he's got the stiff ankle as well. So that's another point. So if you are driving a car and you have a flat tire, you're not getting the power into the ground. But if you pump the tires, you're getting the power in. And it's the same as having a stiff ankle. If you have a soft ankle and you're landing and you're not pushing off again with your foot, you're not getting that power down. You need that stiff ankle to get the power into the ground. And obviously then on the right hand side we've got Jack McCaffrey, and it's awkward trying to find a picture like this with a GA player, but obviously we know Jack McCaffrey is a flyer, and you can see for his techniques not far off, and that's while carrying the ball in an actual game as well. Okay, so that front foot, I didn't touch on it too heavily now there a minute ago, but we really need that front foot to strike down and back. So it's actually striking behind him. So if you look at the picture on the right first, he steps with the foot out in front of himself and nearly blocks himself off. So it nearly is a break. So there's loads of braking force. If you put that foot out in front, there's no way of generating power. You're actually slowing yourself down. So what we need that positive shin angle. So we need the shin facing forward, the same angle of the body. So it's striking down and back. So you push back to go forward. And I think this image, is particularly that image on the left, really, really demonstrates it. Teresa, would you have anything to add on that?
No, just like what you said, and it's like a straight line there from head to toe, full triple extension on the back leg, and like really getting the force into the ground, like so. And then, like you said, the front foot, it's a real break. So it's really important that we get that foot just underneath the hip. So it's like Newton's third law: every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So any force we exert downwards and backwards will result in us going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, and the big difference now, we're going to move on to the max velocity now in a minute, but the big difference now is everything we're doing here in this acceleration is with this forward lean, and that leads on into these couple of drills and games working on acceleration. So a few technical drills now, guys. We're on the technical drills and games today. We've kind of limited how many videos and stuff like that we put in, just because on Teams and on these webinars, the videos can be very, we'll say, temperamental. And they might not work on everyone's internet connection and stuff. So we've kind of gone for screenshots. A lot of our screenshots come from YouTube, and there's the GA Athletic Development YouTube page. So we took a good bit of stuff from there. So working on that forward lean, which is what we need, or we say we need, because we want to go forward in acceleration. So that's what our main technical drills are working on here. So if you look at that first top picture, so that'd be like a wall drill. So that could be maybe used off a ball wall or off the rail around the pitch. But you're just getting yourself used to being in that forward lean position. And still, he brought the knee up nice and high as he can, level with the hips, and he's got that shin parallel. So you're getting used to being in that position and to do different strides and marches in that position. So that's one really good drill. A falling start and lunge start. So falling starts when you're standing up straight. Let yourself fall, and before you hit the ground, you'll get yourself out and start, but you're starting from a low position. Lunge start would be something similar. So you see this bottom picture, that would be our lunge start. So because you're starting down like that, you're forcing yourself to start low and then rise up like the plane, like that again. And hill sprints, again, would be another one for helping to have that little bit more ground contact time and to get that forward lean. It'd be another good one working on technique. Now, again, guys, to probably fully get your head around some of the drills here, YouTube might be one of your best friends, and that athletic development page channel is a good one. In terms of games for working on sprinting and speed, or for other more open drills, so rather than just purely technical drills, it's really important that we create intent. Now, when I say intent, I mean that players are giving absolutely 100% to this, because there's no point in practicing our sprinting or speed work if players are running at 90%. To get fast, you have to run fast. So we need to be running at maximal intensity. So to do that, we have to create some sort of a competition or some sort of a reward or something that they're running away from, just to make sure that they are absolutely giving everything. So with kids or with youth athletes particularly, chasing and competitions like this are absolutely perfect. So an example of this, maybe we could get two players in a lunge start position, and one's 5 yards in front of the other, and then it's a 20-yard chase. The first fella is running as hard as he can to keep away from the fella behind him, and the fella behind him is running as hard as he can to catch the fella in front. Just something like that, some sort of a tweak. And like I said, get creative with it, just to find ideas to make sure that they are 100% giving everything. An example of maybe trying to work on acceleration and bring the ball into it is maybe timing the run off the shoulder. So if there's a cone 10 yards in front, you have to time it to get there at the right time, and you have to accelerate out there. That's just an example with the ball. But like I said, absolutely get creative with it. As long as you have intent and the players know that they need to go on as fast as they can, it should work absolutely fine. And moving on to max velocity then. So looking at this image, straight away you can see that the runner is more upright. So now when I say max velocity, so obviously when we're sprinting, we're accelerating away, getting up to top speed. And max velocity is when you get the top speed, you're trying to you get as fast as you can and stay there. So the big thing here is maintaining the power we already have. So if we look at this image here, if we can just focus on the foot that's colored red. So at the very start here, the foot colored red is just landing, and then it's the foot he's standing on, okay? So he pushes off with the foot in red, and you can see he's still got the full triple extension. He's still pushed off from the ankle, hip, and the knee. But instead of the forward lean, it's a lot more of an upright posture. The foot cycles round then, so it cycles round in the air and it tucks up by his bum, and before coming through with a nice high knee again and starting the cycle. So the key thing here is we push off, we still get our full extension, we cycle it, tucking it up by the bum, and it comes out with a nice high knee again at the far side. The arms as well. So we're looking at cheek to cheek or pocket to socket, just as long as it's going back low, nice and far, and then coming up by the face again. Teresa hit me with a new one earlier. Is it hip to lip? So there's that many different rhymes you can throw at it, but that's the same motion you're looking for. So big arms going from back down by your hip up to your face again, and you still have the front knee driving up high and the back leg cycling behind. I know I'm going through this a bit quick, guys, but we'll stop up now in just another minute, and we'll take questions then, okay? And if there's any questions that are coming in the meantime, we'll make sure they won't be missed as well. So this diagram here now, so it's similar to the one I showed at the minute. It just really highlights the difference between the acceleration phase and the top speed, so that max velocity phase. So you can see it in the forward lean. So we're no longer leaning forward like that. We're standing up nice and high. And then, like I mentioned, in the ground contact time, the acceleration, we need to spend longer on the ground to generate force to get going, whereas we don't have to as much now in the max velocity because we're just trying to maintain that speed, keep it cycling, keep it going. And then we're on to the drills and games. So again, look, it's a little bit awkward to demonstrate the few drills with just images, but we'll do our best to go through it. So ball overhead marching. So this man on the left here, he's carrying a ball over his head. He has to make sure that he keeps his hands by his ears. If he can see his hands, if they come out in front of his face, he knows he's leaning too far forward. So he needs to stay nice and tall, nice and upright. So he's coming out marching. He's still keeping his knee coming up nice and high, his foot coming up nice and high, and he's getting into that really good position. So that's a good technique to work on there. Linking with that, there's the A skip, A march, B skip, B march. There's loads of these athletics types drills, but they're probably too complicated for me to try and explain here now. They're a great one to just throw onto YouTube and you'll see a million videos on them. So that'd be the A skip, A march. But this one here, the ball overhead, trying to march, great one for posture, for getting kids to stand up nice and tall, and keep that really upright posture while still trying to get the knee drive. Bounding is another one. So we'd obviously see when we're doing our warm-ups that we get kids to stride out, but this is like a really aggressive form of striding like that. So the picture on the right is someone bounding. So every time he hits the ground, he's driving on into it, getting up nice and high up off the ground. So again, it might be a nice one for your end. If you're doing a GA 15 warm-up, it'd be a nice one to throw in there, nice and easy, but just really aggressive down into the ground, get up nice and high and keep it really springy. And then opposite to the acceleration, we've got downhill sprints here as well. Just encourage you to have to stay upright and to spend less time on the ground. So open games here again, we need intent. So chasing with a head start, but maybe over a longer distance, so the acceleration isn't as intense. And then otherwise we can do it from a rolling start. So you start jogging, so you don't have to accelerate as hard, and then roll into it from there. And then maybe to try and incorporate the football, we could have a near hand tackle. So again, it's just a chase with the ball or a run at goal. So once the intent is there, players will find themselves getting up to top speed, and we can work on it that way. And then the final component of the straight line speed, we've got deceleration.
Might go back for a question.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, just in the first max velocity slide there was a question saying, why is the front foot hitting heel first?
Yeah. Teresa, have you got that slide there?
Is it up there? Is that
I
the
think
one
it's back to
the fellow with the red foot, yeah. Teresa.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. He kind of is looking like he's landing a bit flat-footed. All right. Teresa, would you have anything on that one? I know he should probably be landing on the ball of his foot, but he does look like he's coming in the heel first in that first image.
Yeah, he does. I think that's actually what happens. It's just, I suppose, you're getting a snapshot there in time, but as far as I know, I think you do actually hit the heel strike slightly first before you move onto the ball of the foot. Maybe
it's just kind of the natural roll, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And then we go from that then onto the ball of the foot.
Of course. So I think Colin asked that question. So Colin, of course. So when we're on the acceleration, when we're angled forward, we wouldn't have the same level of heel strike. But once it's more cyclical like that, we would have a bit more. I don't think I've anything more to add to that. Now, Teresa, what do you think?
No, I think we might just have to check out that photo again.
Yeah. Yeah. So Paul actually is coming in there. Sorry, I have the chat open here now. You should be landing on a flat foot, so it'll probably be more of a flat foot. Yeah, it probably looks a little bit exaggerated in that photo. Sorry, James, I just have this open here, so I'm just going to hijack you for a second. Bounding is a plyometric exercise requiring strength training, requiring correct footwear, not football boots, does not support the foot for the impact of bounding. Yeah, Kieran, that's fair enough. One thing I might say on that is, look, our pitches mightn't be as hard to have to be concerned about it too much. And we probably, especially with lads who are trying to learn the technique, we're not going to be generating the same power as, say, in that image. It might just be a bit exaggerated. I'd say, I know personally, I'd probably feel quite comfortable asking lads to bound, and especially trying to get the technique of powering down. So when we're, rather than up where we would be in the acceleration phase. Again, Teresa or James, if you have any input on that, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to do there is like you're trying to get that power output. I suppose the big thing about that is just to make sure that the kids or the teenagers that you're coaching, that they can land properly. So it is one of the more advanced ones, but like I don't think you'd be starting this off with, you know, a kid that has no technique training done on this. I think you'd progress into it like so. You might start off with marches and skips first and then move into it. But you'll see little kids like doing this stuff, you know, it's part of, you know, if they're doing athletics or anything like that. And I wouldn't be too worried about doing it on the pitch. That's where we play. I think we just have to get used to that. We still have to try and get all that speed work done on the surface that we're actually playing in. So I wouldn't be too worried about that in terms of doing it with boots and stuff, not on a pitch. I think if you were doing that now on concrete or something like that, it'd be different. It'd be a lot more force, isn't it?
Yeah, it'd be a different story then, maybe. Yeah. Okay, Teresa, we might just move on to the deceleration then. Yeah, super. Yep. So just obviously, if we're running fast, we need to be able to stop. Linking this to Teresa's agility coming now in a second, is we need to be able to stop to be able to see what's going on, and then be able to react to what we need to do next, because it's always what am I about to do next. So looking at the top left here, looking at these three images, and before he slows down, before he comes to a stop, he sits up, leans his weight back, takes a couple of small steps, and then sits back into this athletic position and is ready to work again. So we can see that on the right-hand side then in a football context. So the players had obviously run to the tackle or run to get involved or to help defend, and had to slow back and sit. And if you actually see the way the two Meath players are sat into it, they're in that athletic position, the very same as the image on the left. So the actual deceleration technique itself is all about sitting back, work your feet, choppy little steps, and then hit that position and be ready to go again. Now, on the next slide here, we're going to try a video. If it doesn't work, so be it, but we might give it a quick try, Teresa, if it'll work for you. But why do we, like I just quickly said there, so a Ferrari needs good brakes. There's no point being very, very fast if you can't control it or if you can't slow down when you need to. In terms of technical drills, we'll probably hit a lot of this in Teresa's section, so I won't go into it here now, because a lot of it will be stop and then go again in a different direction, or slow yourself and then go again in a different direction. Examples of maybe football drills or that you could use or football skills you can work on while working on deceleration. So a frontal tackle. So if two players are running towards each other, you have to stop up to see what the other player is about to do, and also breaking ball. So if a player has to run over to a pair of players about contesting a kick out, what you have to stop, wait, and assess to try win that breaking ball. Let's see if this video clip plays here now. If not, it's no problem. We'll kind of get the idea of it anyway. So we just see, so he takes off his low acceleration technique and sits back with his little choppy steps before being ready to move off again. And again, this YouTube video is poached from the GA Athletic Development YouTube channel. And then the final slide, kind of on the straight line stuff, It's just a couple of considerations. So when we're doing our speed work or our sprinting work at the start of a session, it's very, very pertinent that we keep in mind recovery times. So it's a very thin line between speed work and conditioning work. So we want to be able to work on our speed at maximum intensity, because top speed is top speed, and that's what we need to work on. The same reason we need full intent from the kids as well. So it's a very, very intense bit of training. So we want for every 10 seconds run, we want between 45 to 60 seconds of break. So if you're looking at a 30-meter sprint, you're looking at least 2.5 minutes of a full rest. So that's why I've got the videos of the picture here of the players walking back around. We don't want to end up doing conditioning, so we don't want to do a 30-meter sprint, jog back, gone again, because that's more aerobic conditioning. You're not going to be able to hit full speed every time. We want to be able to hit full speed to train it and to expose players' hamstrings and different muscles to these speeds to help them on the injury prevention side. So we need full recovery. It's hard to do in practice. It is hard to do in reality. We do understand that, but whether it be, so when you finish your sprint, you walk back, you take a drink, then you go. Just get some sort of routine so that the players aren't jogging back and gone again. You need to be able to try and control it. Say, no, this is what we're trying to work on. We're focusing on speed here. We're not looking at conditioning, and that we need to take that bit longer. James or Teresa, on a practical point of view, would you have any considerations there?
Yeah, I suppose the rest is really, really important, because like you were saying, Ian, you have to go max out and you have to get full recovery, and like you said, it's just conditioning. So from a practical point of view, we'd always be saying, if you're doing line drills or whatever, keep the cues nice and short. But in this case, like, the easiest way to do it is put players into groups of six or eight. So it's walk back recovery, and then they can go again. By the time 7 more have gone, they'll get their 60 seconds rest, or they should have, if they're doing 10 meters out. So that would be just one thing. And I suppose when you have a lot of rest and recovery, it's going to eat into your training time a little bit. So it's really about the quality of the reps rather than the number of reps you do. So there's no point going for, mad stuff like 3 sets of 12 or something like that. Probably 10 to 12 sprints is enough to do, and make sure that they're real high quality, and then that's it.
Even something like 150 meters to 300 meters of total sprint distance is probably loads. So I know that might sound a lot there now, but if you think about it, if you're looking at 5 30-meter sprints, that's your 150 meters. That could be your lot then. So that's a bit of exposure that way. But it's just something to consider. We don't want to lead into the condition. We want to focus purely on speed. So I think we have a question slide next, Teresa. Is that right? Just to take a minute, just if anyone does have any questions, to either throw it in the chat box again or raise hand function. We'll just give it a quick minute there. I think Kieran's actually have to correct me there, in fairness, that ball of foot contact always in sprinting. So the clip art was more of a middle distance runner. Yeah, that's probably exactly what that issue there was. Yeah.
We would always tell players to kind of turn the toe of their foot up so they'd hit the ground with the ball of the foot.
Here's one for you, Teresa. What about sprinting backwards? Yeah,
really good conditioning for your hamstrings and glutes and everything. And when we come to the agility, like that's part of it as well, that we have all those movement patterns, whether it's forwards, backwards, side shuffling. Really, really good.
Catherine asks, would you need to warm up first? Absolutely, Catherine. So if we're to do the maximal sprinting like this, it'd be building on from a full warm up. So say if we do the likes of if we just do a standard enough ramp warm up for maybe 10-15 minutes, at the end of that we have our power and speed section. So we'll get our power, a bit of plyometrics, our hopping, our jumping, and maybe a few sub maximal sprints or in a few submaximal accelerations, decelerations, and from that we'll build into our maximal effort. So absolutely full warm-up would be required before going into the sprinting in order to avoid injuries as well. I see in the chat James has thrown in the link to the GA Athletic Development YouTube as well. Cheers for that, James.
Yeah, and it just goes on on that, Ian, about the warm-up. It's important that we do that speed work directly after our warm-up while we're still fresh. If we do speed work like that at the end of a session when we're fatigued, it's not speed work anymore. It's more of a multi-sprint stamina session, and that's a different thing. So we're not actually going to get faster from A to B by doing speed work at the end of our session. So it just needs to be done directly after the warm-up.
Teresa, question for you from Phelan. What age do we regularly do this training at?
Again, it's going to depend on your players. I would start doing this around 12, 13, 14, 14 maybe. Before that, like any speed and agility stuff that kids do, it's based around games like tag and stuck in the mud and all those childhood games, and that's how they do it. But once they start to move into that teenage phase, then they're able for the more technical aspects of training. And they're able to kind of process everything not everything, but what you're telling them. But we have to bear in mind as well that if we're starting at that age, the players will be going through growth spurts and stuff like that. So we have to be very mindful of
that consideration.
Yeah.
And then, so John has asked, could you clarify how many seconds recovery after how many seconds sprinting? So John, instead of doing actual seconds, I've got the breakdown there, 45 to 60 seconds per 10 meters. So for 10 meters, you got 45 to 60. For 20 meters, you've got a minute and a half to 2 minutes. And you kind of work up the scale from there, if that makes sense. We might just crack on for now, just because we're a little bit tight. Teresa, if you want to work away.
Yeah, so I might just throw this out to you guys again. So if we're talking about agility, what does that mean to you, or how would you define agility? So I might throw that into the chat box for us. Give you a minute there on it.
I think we have one question. We can.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on. No, you go.
That one from Colin there.
Yeah. Would you recommend time recording players to see progress?
Not if you're using a stopwatch. No, if you've got speed gates, lovely. But that's my take on it, which is just too inaccurate because you're measuring improvements in tenths of a second, and your reaction could be 3/10 of a second to hit the stopwatch and start it, or to start it and stop. So I personally wouldn't use a stopwatch. If you have timing gates, brilliant. So I think like what Ian was saying earlier, if you use kind of chasing games to ensure you get maximum intent, I think that's probably the best you can do in a club setting, unless you're lucky enough to have speed gates with you.
Plenty answers moving in here now.
I'll throw out a few there, James.
Yeah, so the first one there is the ability to move in different directions, how fast you move, rapid change in direction, ability to change direction with control, being flexible to move in any direction quickly, changing direction in response to a stimulus, the skill of movement in different directions, the ability to change direction, slow down, and speed up without injury, multi-directional movement in shortest possible distance, ability to rapidly change direction regularly, ability to change direction quickly, and ability to move quickly and easily.
Okay, we got one right answer, which is, okay, so this was the old definition of it, the ability to explosively brake, change direction, and accelerate again. So that's just really about like the physical aspect of it. And then the definition was expanded a little bit to include a response to a sport-specific stimulus. So when we were talking about movement earlier on, the context of Gaelic games, that's what we're talking about. So being, fast over A to B and being able to change direction quickly, it's really only half the story. So we have to take into account the decision-making process as well. And Ian Jeffries came up with this all-encompassing definition. So it's context-specific movement where an athlete maximizes their sports performance. So linking back to what we said earlier, and it's via the application of sport-specific movement of optimal velocity, precision, efficiency, and control in anticipation of and in response to the key perceptual stimuli and skill requirements of the game. That's some mouthful. So
yeah, it's nice and concise, isn't it?
Oh yeah, a lot of words in that. Okay, so basically we're talking about movement in response to a stimulus on the pitch, and it's sport specific. So if I was like, if I'm say an experienced, footballer or hurler or whatever it is, I might look very good in the pitch in terms of my performance, always in the right place at the right time, all that kind of stuff. But then if I went on to maybe a tennis court, I mightn't be as good at reading what my opponent is doing. So it's specific movement in relation to the sport. So agility it's quite complex, like in terms of how to train it. It's very much multifactorial. So we can see all these things you have to take into account. So we've got two main subcomponents. One is the perceptual cognitive speed, which is basically the decision-making element, and then the other part of it then is the more physical stuff about the change of direction speed, or CODS. So with CODS, we're looking at our technique, so where we place our foot, our stride adjustment, our body lean, and our posture, all that kind of stuff. We're looking at our straight line running speed. We're looking at our lower limb strength and power, so that will be all the qualities that we would develop in the gym. And we're looking then at our body structure, our anthropometry stuff as well. Then when we look at the other side, we've got our decision making. So we're looking at like scanning what's happening on the pitch in front of us, our knowledge of the situation, our pattern recognition. So generally speaking, experienced players will have been through some pattern before, and they can recall it a little bit quicker. And then we have anticipation as well. So I suppose that's the first thing when we're thinking about agility. It's not just about how quickly you can run from A to B and change direction. And initially, all our tests of agility are all like that. They're all 505s and Illinois agility tests and stuff like that. So it's an important component, but it's not the whole story. All those tests are carried out, like they're pre-planned, they're carried out in a closed environment. And what we can see actually from the research is people who are very good at change of direction in terms of the mechanics aren't always the best performers on the pitch. So agility, it's a little bit more encompassing. It's about a player's ability to assess their environment, to process whatever information is coming in, make the right decision, and then react with the appropriate skill and at the appropriate speed. So there's a lot in it. So it's context specific. So athletes are always trying to maximize their sports performance and using an effective movement if and when required and as required. So I suppose when we're thinking about it in a game context, well, a player's not going to change direction until something tells the player to do so. So they might receive, some sort of a signal or a stimulus, and then they have to formulate a response to it. But then it's not enough to just think and decide. You also have to act on it then, and that's where your change of direction mechanics comes into play. So this is the OODA loop, and this is something that was actually borrowed from the military, from the Korean War. So this was basically about big fighter planes, the MiG planes. They weren't as effective, I suppose, as the F-16 planes, which were smaller ones, which were in operation in the Korean War at the time. So there's a guy called John Boyd, and he came up with this explanation as to why the smaller planes were way more effective in the Korean War. And he basically put it down to their maneuverability, or their agility, really, of the planes. So the OOD loop, he came up with a theory to kind of explain how these fighter pilots were so much more successful in their smaller little planes. And it stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. Okay, so the observation phase, that's just where you're perceiving what's happening, processing as much information from as many sources as possible. And then the collection of this information, it's important to process because decisions will ultimately be dependent on this collection of information. And then during the orientation stage, well, that information is used to get a perception of what's evolving and what needs to be done. So a key part of this is distinguishing relevant information from insignificant information, and that will be based on a number of factors, including your experience. So that ability to interpret what's happening around you is critical, because like all the information is no good unless you can interpret it. And then the decision phase, right? So we've decided what we're going to do, and we select a certain path. And then the action phase then is where we carry out this decision. So when we look at the two players there, the attacker and the defender, if we break down what's actually happening, so from the attacker's point of view, he has to process whatever stimuli is provided by the defender and the surrounding environment. So he's looking at the body position of the defender, where his feet, his hips, his torso. The movement of the defender, is the defender static? Is he moving towards him? Is he moving away from him? Where are the closest opposition players and teammates? Is he there on his own, or is there a load of players behind him? What are they doing? And then the attacker, on the basis of all that information, has to decide, well, am I going to take it on a pass, or am I going to take a shot? Do I take the player on directly? Do I do a feint? Do I do a sidestep? Do I turn back? And then, so there's a lot of decisions to make. And then the defender on the opposite side, well, he has to look at what the attacker is doing and the surrounding environment as well. So he'll be looking at the position of the feet, the hips, the torso and all that of the attacking player. He'll be looking at the movement of the attacker. Is he slowing down? Is he speeding up? Where are his teammates like? So is there somebody running off the shoulder? Is he on his own? What are they doing? And then based on all that, he's got to decide, right, do I stand him up? Do I tackle him? Do I anticipate a sidestep and just adjust his own body accordingly, or does he anticipate a feint or a pass? Does he move accordingly? So all of this sort of mental processing and decision making, it occurs very rapidly, and it occurs consciously and unconsciously. So there's an awful lot going on there. So I suppose in this scenario, what attributes do we want to have as a player? So what player is going to win out in this? Is it going to be the fastest player? Is it going to be the one who can change direction the fastest? Is it are all the movements performed at maximal speed, or does the accuracy of movement play a role? So what we know is that a player who's a high level of agility, it's not necessarily the player that can move the quickest. So an agile player is one who can rapidly process their opposition and environment. They can make a decision and then move in the appropriate way at the appropriate speed. So skills that require high levels of agility, like your sidestep or your one-on-one tackling, they're not about maximal speed per se. It's about varying the pace, reading the situation correctly, just in order to move the right way, the right time, and at the right speed. Okay, so we're going to go in now so that's the decision-making end of it, and we'll touch back on that later. So we're just going to look briefly now at the mechanics. So how do we change direction? So Ian has already spoken a little bit about the deceleration position and the athletic position. So the athletic position there is in the picture on the far right. So it's like a quarter squat position, and this is a good beginning stance for a variety of movement patterns. And the other position we would have would be the staggered stance up there on the top. So we're looking at a slight bend in the knees and hips, again a slight forward lean of the torso, and back is nice and flat, head is straight up, and eyes looking ahead. So this is our kind of our base position, or our staggered stance position. So when we look at the type of steps we've got, okay, one of them will be a plant and cut. So here we have a player like sprinting out maybe 5 meters from a cone behind, and he's going to just turn direction 45 degrees more or less to the right. So when we're looking at the good mechanics here, we're looking at hip inside knee and knee inside ankle. The plant foot is pointing straight forward, and then when on the knee and the foot of that's going in the new direction, that points towards the new direction that we're going in. We have a similar type of thing then if we're going to turn and go backwards, and it's a drop step. So again, the same thing. We can see there's a nice straight enough line between foot, knee, and hip, and then the player opens up the inside leg, turns, and he points the foot in the opposite direction. Now that photo that was taken a frame too early. If it was let go another second, his foot would point a little bit more towards that yellow cone. So that's our drop step. We generally use that one. We can either use it going forwards, but it's the best one to do when we're going backwards, because the angle of the turn just isn't as much as if you were doing a crossover step. Then this is our crossover step. So then again, we're in a good base position. We transfer all the weight onto the left foot, and then we just pull that right hip around, and we're going forwards then in the other direction. And then this is our spin and cut. So again, for this player, he's moving in towards the cone. You see he decelerates. So you can see how important it is to decelerate, because before we first change direction, we actually have to decelerate, or we have to stop. Otherwise we just overshoot the runway. So he's put all his weight onto his right foot there. He's sitting back in that nice quarter squat position, and then he spins back out of it, and he hits off in the other direction. So they're our main ones for changing direction. And again, we can put that into a sport specific context when we're doing the roll off. So it's the same thing. And then this is our lateral shuffle then. So again, we're looking at this guy here. You can see that his hip is inside his knee is inside his ankle, and the foot is pointing forward on the plant foot, and then the toes pointing slightly outward, going back in the new direction of travel, which is to the left, and his torso then is leaning towards the left. And then we've got a few ones here, just a poor technique. So you can see here, if you look at on the left, his torso angle is roughly about 45 degrees. This lad is basically gone all the way over nearly. You can see his knee is right out over his ankle, and he doesn't have his center of gravity over his base of support, so he looks unstable. And then down here, it's a blurry picture, but it's a good one. This is actually a basketball player who messed up her sidestep, and she ended up, this is actually the moment where she tore her ACL. So again, when we look at her, you can see that her right foot is way outside her base of support. She's not in control of that at all. And the big difference between her and your man on the left there is that her torso is going in the wrong direction. So she was pushing off her right foot to go left, but you can see her torso now has gone to the right. So she's just exhibiting really poor neuromuscular control of her trunk. And that, as we know, that and landing straight-legged from a jump are the two main mechanisms in which we tear our ACLs, and our non-contact ACL injuries make up 60 to 80% of all of them. So again, if we can teach our kids how to cut and how to sidestep properly, I think we're doing them a great service. Right, any questions?
Yeah, I think that was a lot of information very quickly, so we might just take a minute to see if anyone has anything from that.
Okay.
I think, like you said, Teresa, on that last one, it definitely, the big takeaway is of the torso heading in the direction you want to go. So whereas that basketball player who have suffered her injury, her torso was heading the completely opposite direction. Whereas if you were thinking, I want to be heading out to my left, but my body's still going right, I'm heading left, I need my torso angled that way.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really important in terms of the mechanics, and that we teach it that way. All right, we might just crack on if there isn't any questions. We might just take them at the end, maybe just to.
There's two there, Teresa.
Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Gary's just asking, is it possible to share the deck? I'm not sure what they mean by that.
We can share the slides afterwards.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
And then there's just a second one about evasion games in national schools, such as Bulldog.
Yeah, brilliant, because that's how we do speed and agility with kids, and like the more of them they play, the better, because they'll have those movement patterns learned, and then when they hit into their growth spurt in adolescence, we're going to have to basically reteach that kind of stuff, because after their growth spurt they're going to have a new body. So if they can kind of remember what those, like, they won't consciously remember it, but they'll have learned it through being in the environment and through playing all those childhood games, and if we're not teaching stuff like that for the first time as teenagers, it's great. So yeah.
And just another question in there as well. Just, would ground conditions dictate the doing of any of these drills?
Yeah, you're not going to get a lot of, like, in a really wet, mucky pitch, it's not going to be really good in terms of, in terms of doing that. Like, yeah, so it's, look at what you can only do, what you can do. Like, like even when we're playing games during, say, National League time, usually at the beginning of winter, the pitches are soggy. That's what you have to play on. So I suppose you have to kind of get used to it as well. But yeah, ultimately you'd like the ground to be a little bit hard, but not too hard, maybe.
Just another one after coming in here. So would you recommend plantar flexion and dorsiflexion exercises to improve ankle and foot movements?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, especially like plantar flexion, so it's just basically pointing the toe downwards, and dorsiflexion is pointing it up. So when, like, Ian was going through his acceleration and stuff, that's what we say to them. It's like knee up, toe up. So you want to be hitting the ground with the ball of the foot, and in order for that to happen, you have to dorsiflex the foot. Otherwise, you're going to be hitting it with your toes, and you don't want that. You're going to get no power off that. So you want that to happen. Yeah, absolutely. And you strengthen up the ankle complex as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's all the questions.
Cool. Okay, so we'll move on. So I suppose when we're going teaching these, we're looking at, okay, what are closed and open drills. So closed drills, they're just basically predetermined patterns. So you run from cone A to cone B to cone C, whatever it is, and there's no reactive elements. So these are really useful for just teaching kids the mechanics before they become overloaded with too much information. And then as they progress and they get better at it, then we can move over and transition over into our more reactive drills, or our open chaotic drills. So we're going into stuff like 3v3s, or moving in response to a stimulus, whether that's auditory or a visual stimulus. So the closed drills are nice and controlled, and we use them basically to teach technique. I suppose the only issue with them, or the disadvantage with them, would be that sometimes it doesn't train the perceptual part, the perceptual cognitive part of agility. It just helps us, I suppose, really in the mechanics, and the transference then from closed drills to actual performance is quite limited, as we'll see later. So we start off with that, we teach the mechanics using that, and then we progress it. So just to drive on with that a little bit. So if we look at the practical applications then of training agility, so like I said, we start off with our technical skill development. So this is our beginners. We teach them how to accelerate, to decelerate, to change direction, to do their lateral shuffle, back pedal, all that kind of stuff. So your equipment for that can be your cones, your poles, maybe your ladders if you want to use them a little bit, or even better if you can use a kind of a live person as the kind of object or the obstacle. Sorry. So they're starting to read body movements a little bit. The disadvantage of those drills is that like sometimes it can be unnatural and non-specific footwork. So sometimes when we're going through the ladders and stuff, it's all these little tiny steps and we're looking down at the ladders. So while they have their use in terms of coordination development and in just getting players up in the balls of their feet, just don't become too reliant on them. And so, but again, they're really suitable for developing athletes or athletes that are lacking basic COD technique. So an example of that would be the first green box there, where it's a simple L drill. So we just accelerate out to it, turn right, accelerate to that one, and maybe do the same thing on the way back. So you're getting your left turn in, and then we can progress that. Then we might add an auditory or a visual stimulus, but it's just kids are learning the technique, and that's all we're interested in that. And then we can progress it on a bit, and we might put a number of those movement sequences together. So we go into pattern running. So that's the drill there on the right. So again, it's a closed drill because we know where we're going. We're told where we have to go. We go from cone A to cone D or E or whatever it is. So we might mix up the movements here. So let's say we've taught them how to accelerate, decelerate. We've taught them how to lateral shuffle. We've taught them all those movements. So now we might combine them. So we might sprint to the first cone. We might side shuffle right to the second, side shuffle left to the third. We might spin and cut back to the fourth. And then we might open up with a drop step and sprint to the last one. So again, it's all pretty much pre-programmed, but we're just stitching a couple of those drills together to just make it a little bit more complex. And then we can add an auditory or a visual stimulus. Then we can add a ball at the end of it, or we can just adjust it so that it's a little bit more sport specific and a little bit more reactive. And then ultimately what we're trying to do is get to the reactive agility training, which will be something like doing mirroring or shadowing or dodging or any kind of one-on-ones like that. And that's really for our more advanced athletes, I suppose. It's important they learn the technique properly, even if it's only for injury prevention point of view. And then we bring it into a more game specific context. And then we can go to our little small sided games where it's even more game specific. So that's how we progress these. So just to give you an example of that, so we have a basic star drill there. So so our emphasis here, we're going to pretend we're going to do or teach deceleration body control. So stick and hold on deceleration. So rep 1, we're just going to forward run. Rep 2, we're going to back pedal. Rep 3, we're going to 45-degree forward run. Fourth rep, we're going to lateral shuffle. And then rep 5, we'll do 45 degrees back pedaling, stick and hold. Nice and easy, nice and controlled, learning the technique, reinforcing the good teaching points. And say we've done that for a little while and our players are getting quite good at it. And now we'll give them an extra challenge. So now we're going to put out coloured cones. And we might just call out blue cone, so they have to sprint forward. Red cone, back pedal, and they have to remember what they have to do with each coloured cone. So there's an extra cognitive aspect to that. They might have to do it, maybe if you're the coach, when you blow the whistle, you give them the call, go. It could be you have a ball in your hand. When you throw the ball up, they have to go. When you bounce the ball, they have to go, whatever it is. And then you can put a few little combo movements in that. So you might call out, say blue and orange. So they might have to sprint to the blue cone, back pedal to the centre, side shuffle right to the orange cone, back to the centre, and then side shuffle left to the other side. So again, just progressing it on a little bit. And then finally, then we get on to our 1v1s. So basically here we might have an attacker against a defender. The attacker starts off and he has maybe 10 seconds to get past the defender. And then we can manipulate the space here. We can make it bigger or we can make it smaller. We can maybe progress that to 2v2, 3v3, whatever it is. And then when we look at a little bit more game specific, so let's say we have a kind of a pattern. We want to work on maybe the full back against the full forward, or the corner forward against the corner back. And what we're looking for here is we're looking for the attacker to get past the defender, and then they have to get the ball off the ball feeder, and then they have to maybe score or whatever at the end of it. So how do we design something like that? So what's our sport related task that we have to identify? So first of all, that will be covering and defending an opponent running at them. So that's what the defender has to do. So how will we know if they're performing that task really well? So we'll see if they're maintaining an appropriate distance. Can they prevent the pass? Can they make a tackle or an interception? Or can they control the direction of the opponent's run? So can they basically show them the sideline? So from a performance point of view, that's what you want your defenders to do. And it's really specific to the game. What task-related constraints do you have there? Well, you need to know the rules of the game relating to personal or technical fouls. So you just can't stop them any old way. You have to do it within the rules of the game. And then, like they're going to have to solo the ball after 4 steps or whatever it is. So that's your opportunity maybe then to get in and make your tackle. And then what are they looking out for? The perceptual triggers. So the defender has to keep in mind the movement of the opponent and the movement of the ball. So they have to keep that in mind. And then your appropriate exercise is your attacker running at the defender. The defender has to react appropriately to the oncoming runner and to the ball fed into the work area. So then we can progress that along. We can make that 2 attackers versus a defender, give him a lot more decisions to make. So does he go to the attacker? Does he kind of back off? Does he, how's he going to read a potential run off the shoulder? Maybe we can change the angle of the delivery of the ball, all that kind of stuff. And now we're into stuff that really happens during a game. So it becomes very, very game specific. Okay, so the last bit then is just on measuring agility. So when I was asking you guys for the definition of agility, most of you identified it in terms of how fast you could, accelerate, decelerate, and all that kind of stuff. And that would have traditionally been how agility was measured. So we'd have done a T-test, the 505 agility test, or the Illinois agility test. So those are all pre-planned changes of direction. But we'll all know from coaching that it's not too difficult to identify an athlete who would be kind of outstanding in infield agility. So they always perform well, they're always in the right place at the right time. But if you were going to measure them during these tests, they mightn't be top of the pile at all. So we know sport is full of examples of athletes who are able to read the play so well that regardless of their physical qualities, they're just a meter in front of their opponents at all times. So what they did then was they kind of found, well, do you know what? They did experiments on highly skilled athletes and lesser skilled athletes, and they actually found that the higher skilled athletes didn't perform any better than the lesser skilled athletes in these types of tests. So then going back to trying to measure the reactive part of it, what they did then was they designed these kind of reactive agility tests. And for the reactive agility tests, what they did was they have a participant starting on the line, they'd sprint forward, and then maybe a light would go off like at one of the 2 corners there, and the player would have to sprint through the gate on the left or the right, and then they could time it, so what they found then with that was that the higher skilled athletes weren't actually that much better than the lower skilled athletes in that test either. So they were like, okay, what's the difference like? So then what they did was they put somebody like a coach behind the timing gates, and the coach would move to either the left or the right, and they'd be told, like, if the coach moves to the right, you have to change direction to the right. If you move to the left, you have to move to the left. Then the coach would go right, left, right, and then left, right, left. And what they found then was that the higher skilled athletes were actually really good at reading the body movement of the person, of the player in front. So what they actually determined was it's the movement of the players on the pitch, and the body movement is what actually really distinguishes the higher skilled athletes versus the lower skilled athletes in terms of agility. So like in football, say, like the cues will come from the angle of the hip to determine which way like an opponent is likely to dodge, and the lesser skilled players don't seem to be as attuned into that. So really when we're testing, it really has to be sport specific. And then there was another one done in another study done in netball players, highly skilled versus lesser skilled netball players. And so in that, the player who's been tested had to shuffle to the side, then to move forward, and then break left or right as she decided which direction the ball would be passed. So then what they did was they video analysed that, and the decision time was recorded as the time elapsed from the time the ball was released to the instant the foot was planted to change direction. And then what they found in that was that the more highly skilled players were faster in total movement time in this type of reactive agility task, and that was partly because of their faster decision times. And the lesser skilled players, they initiated their change of direction, their foot placement after the ball was released, whereas the more skilled players moved before the ball was released, so they were better able to anticipate the direction of the pass. So with all those tests then, what we can do is we can divide our players into 4 categories. So we can have fast and slow thinkers and movers. So fast movers, fast thinkers, they're the dream players. So this is a study done from Rugby League. So their decision for fast movers and fast thinkers, their decision time is like really quite quick, and their movement time is quite quick. So that's your dream. So you just keep doing what you're doing with those and maybe challenge them a little bit further in that. Your second category of player then is your fast mover and your slow thinker. So that you can see the decision time there for that slow thinker was 2.5 times the first one, but their movement time was actually quite quick. So these players, in order to get them better at agility, in terms of game-specific stuff, they need more decision-making training. So reactive agility training, or maybe video-based thing. Now, I know that mightn't be practical at club level. Then you've got your slow mover and fast thinker. So again, when you look at the decision time there, it's really, really quick. And the movement time then was quite slow, was 0.5 second, which is a lot in sprinting terms. So to improve that player, they're going to need more speed, change of direction speed training, to improve their physical qualities, so their strength and their power and the rate of force development. So they'll need a little bit more gym work probably to improve them. And then finally, you have the poor old slow mover, slow thinker. So again, a lot of work to be done here. So these guys will need more decision making, as well as a lot of gym work, or you might just send them down to junior B football, whatever your patience is. So those are our 4 categories of players that you'll have in your team. And I'm sure if you're thinking of the teams you're coaching, you'll be able to put most of your players into one of those 4 categories if you think about it. So that's our summary of it. So speed and agility are essential to Gaelic games performance. They're very much entwined with the skills and the tactics of the game. You can't just do it in isolation and say I'm doing speed work and not have any kind of a ball or any kind of context to it. We've lots of various movements, as we've discussed earlier. Speed and agility drills, they should be taught and progressed appropriately according to the level of the players you have in front of you. Don't forget that COD ability alone is not a good predictor of sports performance. So the decision making is absolutely integral, and it's really, really important. And remember, it's all in the context of, is the speed and agility training that I'm doing, is it helping my players to become better footballers or better hurlers? Right. There's some resources for you guys. So Ian mentioned those earlier. And any questions?
There's a couple here, Teresa.
Yeah, go.
Right.
There's just one coming here. So at what age group would you add in open drills?
That will depend on the players. So if you were starting with them, maybe if you had the group at 13, 14 right at the beginning, once they've mastered the technique, it's like you pass level 1 to get to level 2. So then you progress it as appropriately. So you have to really coach what you see in front of you. On the other hand, you could have a minor team coming into you who have none of this stuff done before, and then you need to teach them the stuff first and then move it on. Now, in terms of if you had a kind of a senior team who had a good bit of this stuff done, you could be doing your close drills maybe at the end of your warm-up, kind of during the general prep phase of the season. So that might be around now. Then when you move into kind of the special prep phase of the season, which is kind of around league time, before championship, you might then start transitioning a little bit, and then your real open reactive agility drills then and all that sport specific stuff, definitely you need to be doing that stuff at championship time, around that time. So it will really depend on what you have in front of you and what they've done before.
Okay, there's just another one here. So just on the speed, agility and quickness ladder and hurdle drills, what mechanics of movement should be taught when learning to use them? Yeah,
so again, they're a tool and they're a very useful tool. So hurdles are great for getting the knees up and getting that recovery and stuff like that. You can do things like dead leg runs on them. You can use it to get players on the balls that are free to jink in and out between them. You have to just know what are you trying to achieve by using the ladders. What are you trying to achieve? So if you're trying to improve players' coordination, if you're trying to get them up onto the balls at their feet, they're brilliant for that. But if you're actually saying, I'm going to just do those little tippy tappy one foot in each rung of the ladder to get faster, that's not going to work, because what we know is the fastest person on the ground is the person who can exert the most force into the ground in the least time possible and in the right direction. So that's a function of most force into the ground is a function of strength, least time possible is a function of power, and in the right direction, that's your biomechanics. So just know what you're trying to achieve by using a ladder. It's good for certain things, know what they are, but it's not for other things.
There's
just
another
on the max velocity side,
Go on, Ian.
On the max velocity, there's a drill called wickets, which the hurdles or the ladders can be useful for. Is basically you're trying to again encourage that nice upright posture, and you're nearly flying over the top of them, and encouraging a nice long stride. But that wickets, if you look it up on YouTube or whatever, wicket sprint technique, you'll find that one.
Yeah, and you can use them as well. They're actually really good as well for teaching acceleration and deceleration. So what you do is you kind of have maybe the first 3 hurdles will be basically maybe about two of your little steps, like, you know, in length, and then you increase them by half a foot all the way up along, or whatever it is, 10 centimeters. So basically what you're trying to do, if you do them for an acceleration point of view, you're kind of basically doing nearly a high knees kind of through the hurdles, but you're getting them to get the foot up and drive into the ground to get force. And then as you pick up speed, your stride length increases, and then you can turn the hurdles around and start off fast and teach them to decelerate. Then there's less space between each of the hurdles on the way back, and you're trying to get them to come to a good stop at the end.
Or you can lay the hurdles flat on either.
Stop and knocking them over, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're useful tools, like, absolutely. But they're not the be all and end all. And I suppose when you're developing speed and agility, it's all in the context of, you know, your strength, your power, your mobility, your technique. All of these things feed into it, and then applying it to the pitch.
Okay, there's another one in here. So, when is the recommended time for working on agility for a player after a cruciate ligament knee injury post-surgery?
Yeah, that's like with anything like that, that's all under the care of the physio. So you have to be directed by the physios regards that, what they assess clinically that you're ready for this. So I wouldn't be going near that unless I got clearance from the physio. That's kind of stay in your lane kind of thing. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Another one in here. So what would you say are the 3 to 5 key elements to focus on when seeking speed endurance or sprint repeatability development?
Sprint repeatability. So that's basically sport specific conditioning. So okay, you'll have to be mindful of the load that has gone on in the session beforehand. So basically with multi-sprint endurance kind of stuff, what you're trying to do is whatever your fastest time is from 0 to 10 or 0 to 20 or whatever it is, you're trying to repeat that and keep as close to your best time as possible. So that's usually kind of 3/4 to the latter end of a session. So I'd be mindful of how much work they've done in terms of their total load, because you want to make sure that you're not going to increase their chances of getting injured. That would be the big thing for me on that. And again, when you're doing that, is their technique really deteriorating as they're going through it? So you might have to pull back on sets and reps. So I'd be observing their technique as well, because you want them sprinting effectively and efficiently as well. So I'd be looking out for that as well. Ian, would you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, look, it's a difficult balance between fatigue and building endurance. But yeah, look, if I think the rest timing is the big one there to try and, like Teresa said, to try and be able to hit top speed consistently without overly fatiguing them. I think rest is the big one for me on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to try and do enough so that you can kind of inoculate them against potentially injuring themselves in the match or whatever, given the demands of the game. So trying to get that balance right I wouldn't say it's tricky, but it's like you just have to be very mindful of it and keep an eye out for it. Like, and I think once you see their technique going like really deteriorating, I think you'd have to question the value of continuing that stuff on. So, but again, like with anything with multi-sprint stamina, you build it up from whatever level they're at now. We'll add a couple of little reps, then we might add an extra set and make sure you have an unload week as well so they can recover.
Just another question here on kind of the layout of a session. So would you recommend speed and agility training to be added to a standard 60 or 70-minute pitch session? So maybe a warm-up, speed and agility, then skills, game-based drills, and a game?
Yeah, I personally would always do it as part of a session. I think it's because it takes so long to develop the technique and to get that motor pattern into their heads. And I think if you do something, if you hit it for 5 or 10 minutes every session, over the course of a year, you've an awful lot of quality speed work done. Whereas if you kind of just go, oh geez, we've championship now in 4 weeks, we better do speed for a month until we're knocked out or whatever, that's no good, because it's not consistent. So I would always touch on it in every session if I can.
That's all the questions there.
Super. Great stuff. Just quickly, but while there's still some people left on the call, from the coaching and games in the next couple of days, we're going to push out what we're calling a club assessment program. So it's basically this document where it's remote testing. We're aiming at about 16 to 20-year-olds in each of the clubs, looking for them to perform a couple of tests themselves. So there's a couple of aerobic tests. There's a broad jump for power. There's a sit and reach flexibility. So basically that they would record their scores in these tests, send them in to us. We'll try and engage with these players across these age groups through all the clubs. And then from the results, we'll be able to provide them with some sort of a structured, periodized physical plan for the next couple of months. It might help you as coaches, and hoping it'll help the players as well. So we're going to try and push that out to all clubs and out on social media and everything in the next few days. So bear with us on that. And then the plan going forward is to pair these physical results with the skills testing data we would have got through 2020, and try and prioritize our efforts then as a coaching and game staff from there. I then tomorrow, just on the admin side, I will get this video out on YouTube, and I'll email you all with the presentation itself and with the YouTube link, so you'll be able to go back over anything you've missed or any links you want to look for anything as well. Teresa, anything else?
No, that's it, guys. Thanks a million for all the interaction and everything, and the questions. And we'll see you for the next one.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, guys. Appreciate you logging on.